Before we get into February, please can I tell you about The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy? Because this was my last read of January and easily the best thing that I've read this year so far. I mean, I've only read 4 books, but still, it's going to take something big to top this because it was sensational. Like, the style of writing in this is so beautiful. I wish more modern writers would look to this style of writing and appreciate that it's not just what you write, it's the way that you write it, because I could listen to this writer talk about, picking up some milk from the supermarket. The style of writing is that good. And in fairness, there are a lot of inane things in this book that are like that, but you don't even care because it's so poetic. So if you didn't know, this book won the Booker Prize for Fiction in 1997, and it looks like it was met with a lot of criticism, especially here in the UK. The Guardian described the award ceremony as profoundly depressing. One of the judges from the previous year also complained about the choice of winner. And it's like, back off. This book is fabulous, especially because the thing that struck me most of all while I was reading it is how little I know about colonial Indian history. I feel like we do ourselves a disservice in the way that we teach colonial history. Yes, it's very emphatic on the slave trade and what happened in the Americas. But what about what happened in the other continents? Like Asia, India especially, was a big deal. Like the whole caste system. I was learning about all of this for the first time. I had to look into what touchables and untouchables were and the different ideas around purity. Because even though this book takes place after those laws were broken, all of those social injustices are all still pervasive in the sort of town of Ayamenem in Kerala, India. And it's crazy. It's so upsetting. I also feel like this book sets a precedent for what modern Booker Prize winning books have become, because there's lots of tropes that you now see in the modern ones, but this one really sets the gold standard for it, like things like multi-generational trauma, obviously the impact of British colonialism, unconventional chronology, like the way that it bounces between past and present. These are all things that we see in Booker Prize winning novels of recent years, but it was cool to see, like a pioneering work in that sort of stuff. This was actually the 10th Booker Prize winning novel that I've read. If I was to rank them all, I would probably put this one in second place. So right up there. I really do love it. It's not quite Shuggy Bane. I feel like Shuggy Bane is still my number one Booker Prize winner. I know it's probably not the best winner of all time, but I've only read 10 winners so far, so we'll see how that changes. But this book, it was really putting me in the feels of To Kill a Mockingbird, like when you first read that book and all of the pain and the trauma hits you for the first time, and you're like, now I understand why this is such a big deal. Like, to actually give the reader these characters that feel so realistic, you could have a conversation with them and then see like what they go through on a day-to-day basis. It is intense and important. And I like that this book very much platformed Arundhati Roy as an activist, like off the heels of this book. It took her 5 years to write this book, by the way. She put a lot of effort into it. And then she used that as a platform and a springboard to, talk more about this. Because this book, it was banned in a lot of states in India because it so openly talks about sexual promiscuity between a touchable and an untouchable, between Amu and Velutha. And that's how you know you're doing it right. If, the audience that you're targeting ban the book and say that it's, we can't read this, you've touched a nerve. So good job. And then her next fiction book wasn't until 20 years after this. So, I mean, Donna Tartt stepped back, 20-year gap between two novels, like, impressive stuff. What I will say, though, is this book is very expositional. It has to tell you an awful lot to provide context, which I didn't mind. But even at the later parts of the book, there were times where I wish it had relied more on like sort of dialogue and interpersonal connections than just setting up like, this is so and so's life story. Oh, by the way, this is so and so's life story. Because Velutha, I hope I'm saying his name right, he is very similar to Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird. It was also giving a bit of Uncle Tom's Cabin. You know, that sort of idea of like discrimination, but then you've also got the added side of like forbidden love. This book is fit to bust with different storylines and messages, because you've got the gender inequality, you've got the main characters being non-identical twins, and all of the sort of trauma that came from having them separated at the age of like 7 and then meeting up again like over 20 years later. You've also got there's a whole communist B-plot as well about Marxists coming into India and trying to like bring about social reform. I was glad that didn't become the main storyline, because I felt like the interracial relationship between Amu and Velutha was the one that was the most poignant, especially for a Western audience, because I think something we don't acknowledge enough on this side of the world is colorism. You know, we appreciate racism, but we don't appreciate that within that you have the sub like facet of colorism. It's, you know, not just a distinction between black and white. There's a distinction of people who are light skinned and people who are dark skinned, because that seems to be the entire basis for this like caste system. The fact that Velutha, his skin is black, while Amu, her skin is brown, and that being somehow related to ideas of purity. But then again, the book is overwhelming with ideas, because when Sophie Mull comes into it, their cousin, the cousin to the twins, we suddenly get all of this about like Western exceptionalism and how all of the Indians are trying to learn English so that they'll be more socially acceptable, and they're all like envious of the fact that Sophie Mull has like bluish grey eyes and she has like reddish brown hair and this pale skin. Like the comparisons, there's so many thought-provoking ideas in this book, and I almost wish it was a bit longer just so that all of those ideas could come to the surface at any given point, because they're all sort of fighting for attention and coming against each other. But I did still really enjoy it. More than anything, this book has style. It's so endlessly quotable. Like, there's so many memorable lines. The way that this writer uses figurative language, the way that she can use an extended metaphor, not just extend it from like one chapter, extend it through the whole novel to the point where it's some sort of surrealist fever dream, but you still also understand the literal meaning of what she's telling us. Like, it's like this whole the symbolism of this book. It is so impressive. Like, you're just reading this like, my goodness, how have I only just read this now? This should have been like taught in schools, you know? Like, it's an important book. So yes, if you couldn't tell, I'm obsessed with this. Probably going to get nightmares from the orange drink, lemon drink man, because that was intense. Need to have some lime and pickle because I forgot how much I love that. But yeah, what a book. What a book. Why aren't more people talking about this? Especially on here. Come on, Book Talk.